All right. Hey, well, good morning, wildlife. Grab a Bible if you don't have one. By a show of hands, who brought their own Bible this morning? Awesome. What happened to this row? It got pushed back. Wow, worship got intense. I love it. Hey, well, if you and I haven't had the chance to meet, my name is Johnny, and I'm the middle school pastor here at Rocky Peak. And if it's your first time joining us, big special welcome to you. We are excited that you guys are here this morning. Every single week, I feel like we keep getting closer and closer to hitting that impossible shot. So keep in mind, if you bring a friend, you and your friend, if it's their first time, they get a chance to shoot their shot for the chance to win a Nintendo Switch Lite, which is a pretty epic prize in my mind. But you got to bring a friend that is brand new to wildlife, all right? Hey, well, as we jump into this time of teaching, there is what we call a message note sheet. It looks just like this. If you have one, wave it above your head so we know you have one. Awesome. You can fan yourself a little bit. It's supposed to be really hot again today. Just by a show of hands, who prefers the heat? Okay, when I mean heat, I mean like how it's been the last few days, like triple digits. It's just hot. Really? Okay. All right. Respect to you. Who prefers the cold? You prefer like rainy, like honestly, 65 degrees is like the sweet spot. You know what I'm talking about? Yes. I prefer the cold. Hey, awesome stuff. Hey, before we head into this time, I want to just ask a super random question to kind of get the ball going here. So all you have to do is raise your hand. I'll choose you. You'll say your name. If you don't know it, make it up. But I've been cut off. All right, we're done. So here's the question, all right? If you can go anywhere in the world, not I want to go to Mars. You can't do that, all right? If you can go anywhere in the world, where would you go? And why? Some people last night were saying Tokyo in Japan. Someone said Disneyland, and I was like, put those together. All right. Let's go right here next to Penelope. Sorry, Penelope, you're cool, but here we go. Tell everyone your name loud and proud. Hold on. Shh. Tell everyone your name. Bella. Let's give it up for Bella, guys. All right, Bella, where would you go and why? Okay. Because why not? Yeah. Ooh, that's pretty sick. Yeah, it's also in Alaska. Imagine going to sleep and it's still daylight out. That's Alaska. Awesome. Nice to meet you, Bella. Let's go right here. Yep, you right here. Tell everyone your name loud and proud. London? Okay, cool. London, where would you go and why? Is it London? No. Okay. All right. Where would you go? In the Bahamas? You said pigs swim? In the Bahamas? What's in the food there that makes pigs swim? That's awesome. We should all plan a trip and go watch pigs swim. That's cool. Let's go right here, my man right here. Tell everyone your name loud and proud. Micah, let's give it up for Micah, guys. Micah, where would you go and why? I'm just so curious. In Canada, we have that here in a real country. Sorry, Andy. Wait, sorry, say that. It's just better in Canada. Okay. Hey. I respect that. Let's go with one last one right over here. Hold on, everyone. Shh. Tell everyone your name. Stephanie, let's give it up for Stephanie, guys. Stephanie, where would you go and why? Egypt. Why? Okay. All right. Do you like your teacher? Okay, good. Could you imagine if you didn't like your teacher and she speaks so highly of it? I bet it's terrible. Awesome. What would you do first in Egypt? Nice. Aliens made those. Did you know that? That's not true. We don't know how they were made. No, that's awesome. Hey, well, as we head into this time of teaching, afterwards, after the service, I'm going to be hanging around over here. If we've never met before, it's your first time, I would love to give you a high five, a handshake, whatever works for you. And I would love just to say hi and welcome to Wildlife. If you want to tell me after the service, where would you go and why? I would love to hear that. I'm simple. I'm a simple man. I would go to Disney World, all right? And I would go to Epcot to go on that new Guardians of the Galaxy ride. It looks awesome, looks epic, all right? But I just hate humidity, so it kind of In Florida, it's very, very humid. But hey, as we jump into this time of teaching, grab that message note sheet. What we're about to do is we're about to head into what we call the most important time of our service. And really, for all of us, it's an opportunity to go before God and really to see how awesome Jesus is and to really see what is he calling us to as middle school students, as sixth graders, as seventh graders, and eighth graders. All right. So grab that message note sheet. There's going to be fill-ins on the screen behind me, and that's a great way to follow along. It's not a test. It's not a quiz. All right. Let's go ahead and pray, and we will jump right in. So King Jesus, we're grateful because you're with us. You're for us. You are not against us. Jesus, I don't know where some of us are coming this morning. Maybe some of us are just tired. Maybe we're going through a lot at home. Maybe there's some home stuff that is just really crazy. Maybe for others of us, we're having a really hard time at school as we started this new school semester. It's just really, really hard already. Jesus, maybe for others, we're dealing with anxiety and worry and stress. Jesus, wherever we are at this morning, would you just simply remind us of how awesome you are? And would you just remind us that you're always with us, despite whether we feel it, you are always, always with us. So Jesus, as we enter into this time, would you speak to us very loudly? If there's any distractions going on, would you just take those away so that we can focus on you and your word? And it's in your name we all said, amen. Well, I don't know if it's your first time, your second time, or your millionth time in wildlife. Here at Rocky Peak, we value so many different things. One of the main things we value is having fun, and I love that value. But other things that we value is this phrase called listen and follow. Now, for some of us that maybe have grown up at Rocky Peak, especially if your parents go to the main service with, Pastor Michael, you might be familiar with that expression. Here at Rocky Peak, we really value the idea of listening and following God's leading in our life. You see, we deeply desire here at Wildlife, we want to hear God's voice. And not just hear his voice, but we want to follow him. That whatever Jesus is calling us to, we want to do those things. Now, maybe for some of us this morning, you're honest, you're like, I don't have a relationship with Jesus. For whatever reason, maybe you're still asking questions, whatever it is. But others of us that say you are a follower of Jesus, we want to be a community here at Rocky Peak, here in Wildlife, that we are listening and following God's leading in our life. Now, I bring that up because we are starting a brand new series for the month of September called Listen and Follow, the Story of a Prophet. Now, what we're going to be looking at in this series is we're going to be looking in the book of Jonah, and what we're going to be looking at is how a prophet of God did not listen and follow to God's leading in his life. And his story is crazy. Maybe for some of us, we're familiar with it because we grew up going to church, or we're like, you have a grandma that showed you or like this book or whatever, and it like popped up, and you're like, ooh, a whale. And maybe for some of us, we're just familiar that this guy named Jonah got swallowed by a giant fish, and we're like, that's cool. I wish that would happen to me someday. But wherever we're coming from, this is an important story, because what's important to know is that this prophet Jonah did not listen and follow to God's leading. And we're going to understand and unpack why did he not do that. So on your note sheet, your first fill-in, what we need to know is, what is a prophet? If we're going to be looking at one of the prophets, one of the minor prophets in the Old Testament, the first half of our Bible, we need to understand what a prophet is. So here's your first fill-in on your note sheet. Super simple definition. A prophet is a messenger of God. That is what a prophet is that God would download messages to prophets, and then they would go and tell the certain people, Israel, whoever it is, what God's message is. But what's interesting about Jonah's story is that God gave him a message, and what we're going to see this morning is that Jonah ran away, did not want to share this message that God had for a city known as Nineveh. So if you guys have your Bibles, we're going to open up to Jonah chapter 1, and we're going to be starting at verse 1. Now, Jonah, again, is in the first half of the Bible, known as the Old Testament. And Jonah is actually one of the shortest books in the Old Testament, with only 4 chapters. This morning, we're going to be going through chapter 1. And the story is much like a narrative. So it's an epic story that a lot of crazy things happens, especially in chapter 2. But chapter 1 is going to set the stage of why this is so important for us to know. So Jonah chapter 1, starting in verse 1. If you are there, give me like a thumbs up if you're already there. Cool. Wait a little bit longer. Hey, just keep in mind, if you have a physical Bible like I do, the first couple pages of every Bible has what we call a table of contents. This is a great way to find out like what page number is this book on and stuff like that. So never feel like shame or guilty of like, oh, I don't know where this book is. That's okay. Use that as a tool to help you find where you need to go. All right. But Jonah chapter 1, starting in verse 1. Give me a thumbs up if you're there. I hear some pages turning. Mark's ready to go. He's ready to go. Go Dodgers, by the way. Yeah, free panda. That's really only why I root for them. So Jonah chapter 1. Now I'm hungry. Starting in verse 1. Says this. So the word of the Lord came to Jonah. Jumping down to verse 2. The word said, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because its wickedness has come up before me. So God gave this message to Jonah. Hey, go to the great city of Nineveh and preach against it, because they are an evil, wicked people. And God has a message for them about their wickedness, about their evilness, and Jonah is that messenger. Now, a prophet is a messenger that hears the message from God and goes, tells whatever the message is to those people. Jonah did not want to do that. Jumping down to verse 3, it says, but Jonah ran away. If you have a pen with you and you have a Bible with you, underline those 3 words, Jonah ran away. We're going to be unpacking that later of like, what does it mean that he ran away? And more so, why would he run away? If he's a prophet of God, why is he running away from God? That doesn't make any sense. Continuing, it says this, so Jonah ran away from the Lord and headed for Tarshish. He went down to Joppa, where he found a ship bound for that port. After paying the fare, he went aboard and sailed for Tarshish to flee from the Lord. Now, let's pause real quickly and understand, why would Jonah run away from God when God told him, hey, go to Nineveh? Now, I don't know about you, but this question for me is like, well, what is Nineveh like? If Jonah's running away, well, maybe there's something about Nineveh that maybe scares him or whatever. We don't really know as of this moment in this story, but we will later on. But what we need to know is, why would he go to Tarshish where he should be going to Nineveh? All right, here's a map on the screen behind me to kind of help us visualize, like, where are we at on planet Earth? All right, so Joppa, you see on the bottom right here, Joppa is where he went on a boat with a bunch of sailors to head towards Tarshish, which is about 2,500 miles away from Joppa. If you notice, Nineveh is a lot shorter distance, 550 miles, give or take. And what we see here is Jonah goes as far as humanly possible at this moment of history to get away from Nineveh. He goes out of his way to go even farther, more than double the distance to get away from Nineveh. So what is up with Nineveh is the question hopefully some of us are asking. Well, I'm so glad you asked. Jack, I heard it in your brain. I heard it. It's awesome. Here is what we need to know about Nineveh. Nineveh is a messed up city. They are an evil people. And Jonah is aware of that. What's interesting is that modern day, today, actually where Nineveh is located is where Iraq is located today, which there's a lot of messed up stuff going on over there, right? But what we need to know about Nineveh is this, is that here's a couple of fun facts about Nineveh, of the people there, that what they would do to other people. Number one, here's an image on the screen, that they would actually impale people like kind of like a shish kebab and kind of leave them for dead. Now, for some of us, we're like, oh, that's really bad. No, that's terrible. Maybe for some of us, we were like, oh, they probably are like punching their brother in the face. Like, no, that's not as bad. Don't do that. But this is pretty messed up stuff, that they would actually impale people on these spikes. And furthermore, the next image here is that they would actually pull people apart from their limbs until they died. Like some really messed up stuff. But really, for me, what kind of like where I draw the line, like all this stuff is bad, but this is where I draw the line. That a lot of people in Nineveh would worship false pagan gods, and they would actually have child sacrifices to these gods. And to me, that's where I draw the line, like sacrificing a child, let alone anyone, to false gods, these pagan gods, is where I draw the line. But this is the city of Nineveh, this massive city full of evil and wickedness. And Jonah's aware of that. So we don't quite know why Jonah is running away now in the story. If I was Jonah, I would be running because I'd be scared out of my mind. But we don't know why Jonah is running, and we won't know till later on in this book. But let's continue jumping down to verse 4. Now we know how messed up Nineveh is. Human shish kebabs, that's not good. High in protein, though. But here we go, verse 4. Then the Lord sent a great wind on the sea, and such a violent storm arose that the ship threatened to break up. All the sailors were afraid, and each cried out to their own God. And they threw the cargo into the sea to lighten the ship. But Jonah, this is my favorite part of the story, but Jonah had gone below deck where he lay down and fell asleep. Guy's tired, all right? But I'm curious why Jonah went below deck to kind of even more run away from the Lord. And maybe for him, he's like, if I take a nap, all of my problems will be gone because I'm asleep. I don't know why he's taking a nap. But what's interesting is what it goes on to say in verse 6. The captain went to him and said, how can you sleep? That is a great question. How can you sleep at a time like this? Get up and call on your God. Maybe he will take notice of us so that we will not perish. Then the sailors said to each other, come, let us cast lots and find out who is responsible for this calamity. They casted lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they asked him, tell us, who is responsible for making all of this trouble for us? What kind of work do you do? Where do you come from? What is your country? From what people are you? A lot of questions that I probably would have asked someone first before coming onto my boat. They're like, hey, who are you? Where are you coming from? Like, what kind of God do you worship? Like, I would be asking these questions beforehand, but clearly they're like, okay, we didn't do that. So who are you? What is going on? And then in verse 9, he says, he answered, I am a Hebrew, and I worship the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. This terrified them. And they asked, what have you done? So these sailors realize, like, you worship the God of the heavens and the earth and of the sea, and this is your fault. This is like your doing. What is happening? And it goes on in verse 11. The sea was getting rougher and rougher, so they asked him, what should we do to you to make the sea calm down for us? And keep in mind, these are sailors who have been in storms before, but clearly this storm is most epic, and it is the most stormy. Yes, thank you, Jack. Out of all the storms, that was fun. That was great. Let's jump down to verse 12. Pick me up and throw me into the sea, he replied, and it will become calm. I know that it is my fault that this great storm has come upon you. Instead, the men did their best to row back to land, but they could not, for the sea grew even wilder than before. Then they cried out to the Lord, please, Lord, do not let us die for taking this man's life. Do not hold us accountable for killing an innocent man. For you, Lord, have done as you pleased. Then they took Jonah and threw him overboard. That's just really funny to me. They're like, all right, we tried all that we can do. You're out of here. And they just threw him off board. And then the raging sea grew calm. At this, the men greatly feared the Lord, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows to him. So that's really beautiful that these pagan sailors that were originally worshiping false gods, towards the end of this part of the story, they're now worshiping God. They're now worshiping the God of heaven, the same God that the nation of Israel is worshiping. And that is awesome. So that's our passage for this weekend. We're going to pick up in chapter 2 next weekend. But what I had you guys underline earlier in verse 3 is the three words, Jonah ran away. Jonah ran away from what God was calling him to do. And this brings up a great topic, I think, for all of us that we can all relate with and unpack together. And it's the topic of disobedience. Now, by a show of hands, what does it mean to disobey? Raise your hand if you have an idea of what it means. Yeah, what does it mean to disobey? Not follow directions. Anyone else? Yeah, Penelope. Not follow rules. Let's go with one more. Yeah. Disrespecting the Ten. Those are all incredible definitions of what does it mean to disobey. Now, if we were to take a big step back, is that simply put, disobedience means that there's an authority figure in your life, like your parents or, the police or something. There's like an authority in your life, and they tell you to do something like, hey, put your seatbelt on in your car, and you don't do that. That's disobeying some sort of authority in your life. It's like your parents asking you, hey, can you clean up your room? And you go, no. Good luck, by the way. But that's what it means to disobey. And what Jonah did is that God said, hey, go to the great city of Nineveh. I'm going to use you as a messenger to tell them the message I have for them, because they are an evil people. They are making human shish kebabs and sacrificing kids. Messed up stuff. And Jonah ran away. He disobeyed. So here's the big thing I want us to unpack together. Write this down on your note sheet. Here's the big thing. Disobedience leads to misalignment. Disobedience leads to misalignment. That when we're disobeying God, we're going to be not in aligned with what he's calling us to do. If we don't obey God, it's going to be harder and harder to follow God. If we don't obey God, it's going to be incredibly hard to hear God and then follow him. So when we disobey God, what we're doing is we're becoming out of alignment with what he is calling us to. Now, I don't know if you've ever been familiar or have ever seen something called a car before. Anyone's ever seen a car? None of you. All right. You're all liars. How dare you? But if you are familiar with cars, most cars require an oil change, unlike a Tesla. Teslas aren't real. But most cars require maintenance. And another type of maintenance that cars require is a wheel alignment. That, if you don't know this, cars' wheels can get out of alignment, whether you hit a curb or a dog or something. And hey, I'm not doing that, but some of you might. Some of your wheels might come out of alignment. So what you need to go to is a technician, a car mechanic, and get your wheels aligned. And the moment you get those aligned, then you're going to be back on track going in the right direction. Because if you don't know this, even if a car's wheel is off by like 1 or 2 degrees, you may think you may be going in the right direction over time, but eventually you're not going to be going where you actually originally wanted to go. And the reason I share that is that I believe that is true with our lives with following Jesus, that if our lives are not in line with Jesus, then we're not going to be going where he is calling us to go. So the question for us on your note sheets is, how do we align? If we want to align our lives with God, with Jesus, how do we do that? So this is going to be our big action step as we unpack this together. And this is going to go pretty quickly. So the question is, how do we align? Number one, ask this question. Ask God, hey, how's my heart? How is my heart doing? Because if you don't ask God, who created you, who knows how everything's supposed to work, if we don't ask him, then we're not going to get anywhere in life. Like, sure, yeah, we can ask our friends, we can ask our parents, but all those people are broken. We should be going to God, who knows everything about us. And we should be asking him, hey, how's my heart doing? Now, why do I ask the question, how's my heart? It's because your heart matters a lot to God. Your heart is what makes you, you. And what's interesting in our culture today, if you've ever watched a Disney movie, in Disney, they're all like, oh, follow your heart. It's usually like some old lady. Just follow your heart. But the Bible describes our heart as sometimes really, really evil. And what's interesting in the Bible, our hearts are actually mentioned around 830 times throughout the Bible, which shows that, man, our hearts really do matter to God. And our hearts are what make us, us. In Proverbs 4:23, it's on your note sheet, the author writes this: above all else, guard your heart. Put a big circle around those 3 words. Guard your heart. Guard your heart. And he says, for everything you do flows from it. Everything we do, everything we say, everything we act out comes from the state of our hearts. So it's so important to go before God and be like, God, how am I doing? How's my heart doing? And that's a question my wife and I will ask weekly on our date nights. Hey, how's your heart doing? Because we want to get to know each other even more. And if our hearts are not aligned with Jesus, we want to be there for each other. So we have to often ask this question, hey, how's my heart? Jeremiah 17:9 says this, the human heart is the most deceitful, another way for lying. It's the most deceitful of all things and is desperately wicked. That's how our hearts are often. And he goes on to say, who really knows how bad it is? Like your heart needs a lot of work done on it. It needs to be aligned with Jesus. But if we don't assess the state of our hearts and we're just go, I'm sure my heart's fine, it's okay, and we don't ask Jesus, well, that's really important for us to understand that we need to be going before God and asking him, hey, how is my heart doing? And a way we can do that is this beautiful passage in Psalm 139. The psalmist David, as you know him as King David, we just came out of a series last week. He says this, search me, O God, and know my heart. Test me and know my anxious thoughts. Point out anything in me that offends you. You see, oftentimes our hearts, the way we live, is offensive to God. And we need to go before God and be like, God, man, if there's any way that I've offended you, will you point that out to me? And it goes on to say, and would you lead me along the path of everlasting life? Another way of saying that, would you lead me on the path that you are calling me to, your path? Because, Jesus, I want to listen and I want to follow to you. But sometimes we need to ask God to check our hearts. We need to ask God oftentimes, hey, God, if you were to give me one word, how would you describe the state of my heart? Which leads to our second point, which is this. Once we ask God, we then need to wait and listen to what he is calling us to. And this takes practice. This takes time. I think oftentimes we go before God and we pray to God, and I'm guilty of this, and we'll ask him something, and we're assuming that he'll respond immediately. Because I think in our culture today, when you text someone or message someone, if you don't respond within 5 minutes, you're probably like, my friend's mad at me. Oh my gosh, I did something to them. Which is just so funny to me that we have this expectation that you have to respond right then and there. And I think we put that expectation on God that, God, you have to respond right now. And if you don't, well, then maybe you're not even real. That's silly. That's not often how God works. Hear me, sometimes God will respond just like that. But more often or not, we have to wait and listen to what he's trying to tell us. And it requires maybe for some of us just quieting our hearts, quieting everything that's going on in our minds. Maybe for some of us, we have to find a different room in our house where it's a little less busy or noisy to really listen to what God is calling us to. Oftentimes, I'll use like my noise canceling headphones to really just drown out all the noise because people are people, and and I really need to just quiet my mind. And that's where I really want to wait and listen. A story from my own life this past week, I actually did this. I do this pretty regularly. And on Wednesday, I went before God in my one-on-one time, and I've been reading through the book of Acts, and I ended my time just asking God this question, God, how's my heart? And to be honest, it was like a few minutes before I felt like I got like a download from God. And oftentimes I'll ask God, hey, God, describe my heart with one word, because it kind of just is kind of how I'm wired and stuff like that. And I'm like, God, how is my heart doing? Like, can you give me a word to describe the state of my heart? And what was interesting is what I felt like God downloaded to me is that he gave me the word insecure. And I was confused by that because I was like, what do you mean insecure? I don't feel like I'm an insecure person. But as I was wrestling with this and waiting on God, I was like, maybe there is some insecurity in my heart that I'm just not even aware of. Because when we go before God and we ask him, God, how's my heart doing? But we feel like we're like batting like 10 for 10, like we're doing really good, right? But when we go before God and we ask him very honestly, he'll respond honestly, but we have to be willing to listen. So when he gave me that word insecure, I was like, are you sure? Am I hearing right? But as I waited and listened and pondered on it and thought about it, I was like, oh God, maybe you're onto something. Maybe there is a part of my heart that has some insecurity. And to be honest with you, Wildlife, I'm still questioning and asking, like, what does that look like? But maybe for you, maybe your heart is full of anger. Maybe it's anger towards someone, a brother or a sister. Maybe for you, your heart is full of jealousy. Maybe it's full of bitterness, resentment. Maybe it's full of hurt, that maybe someone hurt you. Maybe a friend at school or maybe a bully at school and they hurt you. And man, your heart's just full of pain. And maybe then you act out in pain and hurt by maybe trying to hurt other people or tearing other people down because your heart is full of that. And maybe for you, man, if that's you, I'm sorry. That's incredibly difficult. But what's beautiful about Jesus is that he's with us through those moments. That when God reveals things to us, he's not going to be like, all right, here you go, figure it out. And he like walks away. That would be terrible. No, God's with us. And we need to ask him, hey, what do you want for me to do? Which leads to our third point, which is this. Once we waited and we listened, now we need to follow. We need to do the things that Jesus is calling us to. Do what Jesus is telling you to do. Like if we're going before God and we're trying to be honest and we're asking God, how's my heart doing? And he answers that. But we don't want to get that answer that he gave us. We're like, oh, do you have anything else? Anything else going on? Because I don't like the answer that you gave me. We can't do that. We need to follow through with what he's calling us to do. And what's beautiful about going back to the story I shared is that when God gave me that word insecure, I immediately was reminded that God was like, hey, just so you know, Johnny, that your security isn't dependent on anyone else or anything else. Your security, your foundation is built on me and me alone. That God is the one I need to put my security in, not people or not anything else, but him. And maybe for some of us, if we're being honest, we're a little insecure. And maybe for others of us that are dealing with that, man, we're just like, how do I follow God's leading in my life when I'm dealing with so much insecurity? Realize that God is the only person ever that will give you your firm foundation in your life, that will give you your security. That if you're going through life chasing after people or things, hoping that they'll satisfy you and bring security and a good foundation in your life, you will always feel left out. You will always feel like there is a void in your life. And for me, when I got that reminder, I was like, God, you're right. Thank you. That's a beautiful reminder. And it's a reminder I need to keep reminding myself that God is my security. Here's the thing I want you to catch. It's not on your note sheets, so just listen to this, that Jesus is our model of what it truly means to listen and follow. Jesus is our model of what it truly means to listen and to follow. That when Jesus went to the cross to die the death that all of us deserved, he listened to God's leading and he followed. And for us, we can look to Jesus that, man, when we don't want to do something, but God's calling us to do it, his way is always better. But it's often kind of difficult. And to be honest, sometimes scary. But if we put our trust in Jesus, we will never be left out. We'll always feel satisfied and secure. So as the band comes up, I have one final thought for all of us. As we were to summarize this whole message this weekend, here's our final thought. If we faithfully listen and follow, we will then become more like Jesus. That if we faithfully listen and follow to God's leading in our life, and hear me, this takes practice, this takes time. But if we do that, then we are actually going to become more like Jesus. Faithfully, to be faithful means that you are putting your trust in God, that even when it doesn't make sense, you're putting your trust in God to be like, all right, God, I trust you. I'm going to listen to what you're calling me to do, and then I'm actually going to do those things. Maybe for some of us in this room, we have to forgive someone that we really don't want to forgive, but we know God's calling us to forgive them, and we hear that, but we're like trying to ignore it. We're like, no, thank you. I'm okay. God, I don't think you know how actually bad that person is. But maybe you're realizing right now, like, oh, I really do need to follow and forgive that person. And when we faithfully listen and follow, we'll become more like Jesus. So I'm going to go ahead and pray. And then we're going to go into this last song of worship, and then I'll come back up and I'll close this out. All right? Sound good? Let's go ahead and pray. King Jesus, thank you so much that you're our model of what it means to truly listen and follow. So Jesus, I ask a blessing on all of these students in this room, that would you help them listen and follow. And Jesus, when they ask to hear your voice, would you speak very loudly, very clearly to them? And when they hear what you're calling them to do, whether it's to forgive someone or whatever it is, would you help them follow you well? Because Jesus, we know that you are a good God, a faithful God. You are a God of promises. So Jesus, we just ask that you would be with us. And it's in your name we all said, amen. All right, I'm going to invite you guys to stand on up and let's worship.